Welcome to Financing M&A Transactions and the Power of Relationships. This session is presented by North Shore Bank. Let's meet your panel. Mike Cornell, Vice President, Commercial Lending, North Shore Bank. Dan Council, President, White Family Investments. Steve Cole, Vice President, WBD Inc. Mark Anderson, co-owner, Mastech Manufacturing. And your moderator for this session is Dustin Klein, Chief Content Officer of Smart Business. Dustin, the stage is yours.
Well, thank you, Eric, and welcome everyone. We hope you enjoy our conversation today. As the title says, there's no one way to finance a deal. Depending on your needs, you can be creative in financing growth, acquisitions, or even capital investments. And our panel today offers a group of deal makers and financiers who are going to discuss different ways that they finance deals and how they've worked with clients and partners to do so. We're also going to be talking about the power of relationships and why nurturing strong relationships with capital sources, like any good M&A advisor, can mean the difference between getting a deal done or potentially having it stall. So let's learn a little bit more about each of our panelists and the types of deals they work on and their backgrounds. And we'll start with you, Dan. Tell us a little bit about your background and the deals that you've worked on in the past.
Got it, thanks. So my name is Dan Council. I'm currently the president and CEO of White Family Investments, which is a Milwaukee-based single-family office. We specialize in all asset classes and traditional investments, but have a particular emphasis on direct investments. Previously, I was the global head of M&A for Kohler Company, which is a $7 billion diversified manufacturer here in Wisconsin. During my time there, I led all strategy and was also responsible for full deal cycle execution. What's unique is I've had a career spanning over 15 years in capital markets, acting in a whole bunch of different capacities, such as investment banking, accounting, transaction advisory, corporate development, and even as an entrepreneur for a business that was directly owned by my family. So over my career, I've completed and advised on over 100 transactions across a wide array of industries and transaction sizes, all the way up to $4 billion. I've been on both the buy side and sell side. And during my time at Kohler, we had a particular emphasis augmenting our international expansion strategy, which led to a lot of exposure on cross-border M&A, which can, as we all know, can get particularly complex.
Thank you, Dan. So Mark Anderson, tell us a little bit about Mastech Manufacturing and some of the types of financing and deals you've done.
So Mastech Manufacturing is a local manufacturing company here in the Milwaukee area. As a manufacturer, primarily what we're dealing with is real estate and equipment. However, from time to time, we do have an opportunity for things like an acquisition, which obviously involves a little bit more in-depth and more complicated financing than your standard conventional loans. So, recently we've acquired in New Berlin in the Milwaukee area, and we've been pretty successful at using some of these M&A strategies and some of the different financing tools, such as the 504, to perform those acquisitions.
Great, thank you. I look forward to learning about some of the stacks that you were able to do for the capital on that. Steve Cole, tell us a little bit about WBD, and you work with companies like Marks on 504s, but you also do things around 7As.
Sure, yeah. So my background, again, I'm Steve Cole. I work for WBD here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and we concentrate on SBA lending. The SBA has two main programs, the SBA 504 program and the SBA 7A program. Both work in different avenues, work for SBA or work for acquisition financing. So a typical transaction for us is a partnership with a lending institution where the bank or lending institution does a portion of the financing. We work with the bank to come in and finance a portion of the deal as well. And then obviously the borrower and in some cases seller and other mezz financing can also be part of that capital stack. But our focus is very, very much in the SBA, Small Business Administration world, and pairing those programs with the needs of our borrowers and our banking partners.
Excellent. Thank you. And again, I look forward to diving a little bit into detail on some of the deals and how those things work together with the bank financing to help entrepreneurs and companies do what they need to do. Mike Cornell, talk a little bit about yourself and North Shore Bank and the kind of companies you work with.
All right, I've been in commercial banking in the Milwaukee market for over 35 years. Currently, I am the senior lender in the commercial banking group at North Shore Bank. In my career, I've focused on small and medium-sized businesses. And over those 35 years, I've financed successfully several acquisitions for my clients. We work with manufacturing, distribution company service, trucking, electrical, and mechanical contractors. And the financing varies from large ones to ones where the companies doubled in size and it needed more than what a bank could supply. And we can talk more about that in the next couple of questions.
Great. Thank you. Well, Mark, let's jump back to you a little bit and talk a little bit about some of the deals you've done and the financing around those. You mentioned an acquisition you just did. Can you talk a little bit about how you put together the capital stacks for that, how they were built, and what was the capital used for?
Yeah, we've gone through a few expansions and acquisitions since we started. Most recently was the acquisition of Tape Machinery Corp. In New Berlin, Wisconsin. To do that, we used 504 lending. It allowed us to bring a little bit less to the table to keep some of our cash free for some other capital improvements that we wanted to do as far as equipment and things like that. In doing that, we brought 10% of the overall to the table. The SBA and North Shore Bank then both contributed to make the 90%. By doing that, it really allowed us to keep more cash in our pocket, which allowed us the ability to not be handicapped as we were looking to the business. The bankers did a great job kind of helping us through that process, kind of foreseeing that we were going to have more requirements during the expansion than what we maybe originally thought we were.
Was there anything that surprised you when you were putting together that stack?
Really, the ease of it all coming together was pretty impressive to us. North Shore Bank worked so seamlessly with the WBD, and really they worked as one unit, and it was almost like we were just dealing with one entity as we were going through and doing the financing. So really, there was very few hiccups, and things went rather smoothly.
My understanding is that wasn't the first deal that you've had to put together some interesting capital stacks with them on. You've had some building expansion as well, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Originally, we expanded into Muskego, which was another opportunity for us. That was done a little bit more conventionally under kind of more of an 80-20 style financing, but it was also something where we had to do a lot of leasehold improvements. We had to do a lot of site improvements and add a bunch of equipment at the same time. So again, it was really important that we had that kind of relationship that allowed us to keep that capital for ourselves to do those expansions. It's always challenging to kind of reach that next stage gate when you're in a growth phase and have enough to not kind of choke out the ability to grow, to have that ability to continue to add equipment, add people, and operate.
Mark, what are some of the keys to being able to be successful as you were looking at those two stacks? Completely different approaches in terms of what you guys needed to put in and what you were able to build in terms of financing around it.
A lot of it is just really kind of listening to the panel of advisors that you've put together for yourself. You've got your accountants, you've got your attorneys, you've got your bankers. They have all got really good input as far as ways for you to structure some different deals and have some different ideas of what is required for you as you move forward. There's no one way to do it. There's a number of different mechanisms and vehicles for that financing, and there's really no reason to limit yourself.
And that makes a lot of sense. I mean, as we all know, there's no one way to do it, and there's a lot of different approaches that you can take. And Dan, that brings me over to you. You've done different types of deals with Kohler when you were with Kohler, and all of those had different stacks attached to them based on being international or regional or even just North America.
Yeah, no, right. That's right, Dustin. I would say Kohler being a family-held, privately held business, we were extremely well capitalized, so we were afforded a lot of flexibility and optionality with our banking syndicate. Where we particularly put a lot of emphasis on banking relationships is on international acquisitions. And there was a lot of value with our banking syndicate from that front, because international acquisitions can be so complex on so many fronts, but lending on an international basis can add a lot of value. So some of the complexities we always faced was trying to aggregate cash on a global basis when you have operations in Asia, Europe, Africa, North America. And if you're doing international expansion, aggregating that cash to pool up is not as easy as you think it is. And you can use intercompany lending, but what we particularly used was our banking relationships to finance those. And that helps us mitigate any tax ramifications for moving cash around globally. It also allowed us to borrow money on a local currency basis, which in fact hedges against the local currency in that region. And lastly, we added another local resource to our bench. So that was all very, very helpful for us when we looked at cross-border acquisitions.
When you're doing the ones here in the States, how different are those where you don't have to deal with the currency transactions and changes there?
Yeah, from a perspective at Kohler, we typically didn't finance those because we had strong cash and a line of credit that we could easily access to finance those with relative ease. In different realms and some of the different things that I have done in my career. North American acquisitions, tend to be a little bit easier, where regional banks and local banks, add a lot of value as far as getting that done. Those relationships, they understand who you are, they understand the culture of the business and how your business works. So in different capacities, we absolutely leveraged a lot of local relationships to get deals done, and just their perspective on the different markets and what EBITDA multiples are and how to creatively get things done was really, really helpful.
That makes a lot of sense. Steve, you've heard a couple different ways that these folks have put together the deals that they've done in terms of financing, whether it was equipment, acquisitions, new building area, even expansion. When people come into the WBD and they're looking to put less money into a deal, and they're looking at the 7A program and the 504 program for that. Could you talk a little bit about how that's really worked for them and sometimes been more effective than had they looked at other ways to finance the deal?
Sure, and Mark hit it on the head on the reasons for using some of those programs. The main reason that most people look to the SBA for financing is to finance a little bit more of the transactions, save a little bit of their cash, and keep it in the business to, provide a war chest for whether that be a downturn, that they're anticipating, or future expansion and additional acquisition opportunities that may come down the road. Typically, what ends up happening is those customers don't necessarily come directly to WBD. Most of the time they go to their banker first, and their banker then provides them with options. And as Mark mentioned, and Dustin, you as well, there's no one way to finance a deal. When we get brought into the transaction, that banker may have presented 1, 2, 3 different options for financing. And a lot of times when a company's growing, we work with many small businesses as they're growing, cash is king. And our project structure ends up being very attractive to them because it allows them to put a little less money down. Now, there's the mention of the 2 different SBA programs, and both SBA programs serve their purpose. Both of them are very useful programs. depending on your deal structure and your what you're looking at financing. We can get into a little bit of that if in a little bit, but the deal, what you're asking to finance, will kind of lead us down one path or the other, and we just so we can give you the best financing structure we can.
How does the process work for that? Does somebody like Mike come to you and say, I'm working with this client that's going to be able to, they want to buy a new building and they've got X number of dollars and they come pre-vetted? Or do you sit down with the entrepreneur and bring the banker in? How does that approach work?
The former is usually how that works. Typically, I don't have the relationship with the small business. That's really the banker's relationship. My relationships are with the bankers in the state of Wisconsin, so that they know who we are and how we work. We can help their customers with their financing needs. So typically, a customer like Mark would go to a banker like Mike, say, "Hey, I have this transaction, and I want to. This is what we're looking at doing." And Mike says, "Hey, we can do it X, Y. We can do it this way. We can do it that way." Gives them a couple different options, and like I said, a lot of times when we have a small business that's growing, that 10% down, lower equity injection is a very attractive feature of the SBA programs, and that's when I would get involved.
Excellent. Can you talk a little bit about the size of the deals that you've worked with in terms of different approaches? Because my understanding is it's much more significant and larger than some people think.
Sure. Yeah. So our transactions that we work on and we partner with lending institutions on are anywhere from a startup, a couple $100,000, to large acquisition, large expansion projects that can be upwards of $20-30 million transactions. We partner with the bank. We don't do all of that. The bank does a significant amount of that. If there are fixed assets involved, that's really when the projects get that large. But through the SBA programs and through our capital stack, we can get involved in transactions up to that level. Now, on a acquisition that doesn't have fixed assets involved, those transactions tend to be a little bit smaller. $5 million or less is really where the SBA 7A program caps out. Which is the program that can help finance what we consider called Goodwill, Airball, Blue Sky. It's got many different names, but uncollateralized loans where the SBA can really help that bank get a little more comfortable with that collateral shortfall.
Excellent. Thank you for the explanation. Mike, from your perspective, whether it's working with large companies like Kohler or smaller companies like Marks and Mastech, it seems like, the not just the relationship component, which we're going to get into in a moment, is critical, but the ability to be flexible. And I think that's where where you've really been able to create some interesting deals, and any banker can really sit down and talk to folks like Dan or Mark in terms of their approach. Talk a little bit about some of the things you've put together and some of the folks you've worked with.
Sure. Well, among many things, there's three critical factors I'll bring up that we're always focused on when we start to structure a deal. One is, of course, Mark brought it up, and so did Steve. We always want some liquidity post the acquisition, so they have liquidity to get through any bumps that might happen. Second is we're always going to be focusing on adequate cash flow to service the debt. That means either restructuring the debt to fit the cash flow, or we got to solve the cash flow actual part. And finally, as Steve alluded to, banks want as much of the loan collateralized. Otherwise, it's hard. Banks today don't really want the airball, as Steve called it, to be really sitting out there more than a year or two. So if it is an airball, we got to look for different solutions. A few examples of deals. An easy deal, a fairly easy deal I did was I took a manufacturer from 17 million to 25 million in revenues, and that one was really easier than a lot of them because it was a very solid company. They had a lot of excess cash, excess collateral, and excess cash flow that we could basically structure the acquisition by using the existing company existing. But then you get into other cases where I'm picturing one I took very similar to Mark, from about 2 million in revenues to a little over 3 million. And there we wanted to preserve that liquidity, just like Mark at Mastech. We were looking to, we used a 504 in that case. We tried to keep the liquidity. Also, the nice thing with the 504 is you can roll equipment into that along with the building. And so you're not setting up shorter term loans. So definitely the SBA helps with that. Also, the SBA, especially today with low rate environment, you can lock in a very long term low rate for your customer. And then probably the next deal, probably the more complicated one I did, I took a company about 10, 12 million in revenues and we doubled the size of it. There, the issue was there was a lot of uncollateralized position. So we had to look for a lot of solutions. And actually what we did was the bank took its piece. The seller actually did seller financing for a piece of it. And we went out to the market and found a third-party lender that was doing mezzanine debt who would subordinate to the bank. That way, they were the unsecured piece. The bank was fully secured. So we had to, look for solutions so that we could maintain what those three critical, among other things, but remain keep that company healthy and ensure its success, and of course the bank's return of its loan.
The flexibility issue of looking at the different ways to build those stacks, as you know, and as we've been talking about, no deal is the same. And no financing for that deal is the same. I mean, even, what Dan was talking about, the complexity, whether it was overseas or whether it was a combination of self-financing and credit facilities that were in existence with credit lines. Right. When somebody comes to you, Mike, what is the approach that you start with? Do you sit down and say, what is your liquidity? Do you start diving into their balance sheet to figure out where their existing credit abilities are? Or what do you do?
Well, again, every deal is slightly different, but I think the most standard thing we'll do is we start to look at the buyer's company and the seller, the acquisition target. And the first thing we're going to be looking at is probably cash flow. And we'll probably do both combined historical cash flow. And often the companies will have built some projections, whether that's 1, 2, 3, or 5 years of projections. We'll be looking at that cash flow. Because at that point, that's where we have to start to say, okay, what debt can we actually put in here under what structure to make sure there's adequate cash flow to cover that debt service and maintain the company's liquidity. I think from there, we start to look at the collateral, et cetera, and then say, okay, this is what the bank can do. And then we start saying, okay, what else is there? And sometimes the buyers don't even think of asking the seller what they're willing to do. And that's usually the next step is what is the seller willing to do if, taking a piece of the seller debt as seller financing. And it's a very common practice. And then if that isn't on the table for one reason or another, we can look at other parties. Often if it's to get real comfortable on collateralization, we do start looking at the WBD, the SBA 504 especially program. We always look to see if it's a good solution. And it's not just for the bank. It's often a good solution for the customer. They get long-term financing, improving the debt service. It just makes sense. And like I said, right now rates are very low. You can lock it in for 20 or 25 years. And that's all kind of key for us because, again, going back to those three things is maintaining liquidity, that debt service coverage, and the bank's collateral coverage are the things that we're focused on first.
Thank you. Dan, you mentioned, sometimes you were doing self-financing, other times it was looking at your existing credit lines and debt facilities. How did you decide which way to approach the deal? Was it based on the size of the deal or the complexities of who you were buying?
I think it was typically both. The size of the deal was particularly important, as well as the geographic location. We would look at some different alternative structures with sellers, if they wanted to retain in it, but we predominantly, it was all based on size, where we saw that we could add some value.
And how did you build the relationships with those folks? I mean, a lot of times you mentioned some of the banks that you've worked with, some of the existing credit facilities. From the standpoint of some of these larger deals, relationships are critical to anything, because it builds that trust component and the familiarity with how people approach, whether it is their payback, their books, or even the ethical way they run their companies. Talk a little bit about how relationships played a role in those decisions that you were making.
Yeah, I would say it was primarily two big factors. Is there's company related relationships that, based on, I'll use Kohler as an example, where we had a syndicated bank network that helped support us. And lastly, there was personal relationships that, I had within different markets outside the syndicate. So we would really try and blend those both together to maximize the value add in the transaction. And really, I think, the way we always took the approach was kind of a more the merrier. We really, thought the perspective that each individual bank could provide was unique to some degree, but these are professional, very experienced people. Mike just explained this just on, how many deals he's seen in his career. Leveraging that experience and having another mind in the room was really, really important to us.
Thank you. Mark, from your perspective, when you were going through these various approaches and these different things, how important was it to have this strong relationship that you built up over the years?
Incredibly important. As Dan mentioned, it's both business and personal relationships really affect how you operate and where you look to for support and financing. Some of the thing is just the trust. It's the trust that you're dealing with somebody that understands your needs and has the ability to service them. I think all business owners and entrepreneurs are optimistic, sometimes overly so. Sometimes it's nice to have somebody in the room that although they believe in you, knows that your plan probably isn't going to run as perfectly as you think it is, and make sure you keep those credit facilities available to you as you're going, not where you're painting this rosy picture and everybody has to hit a home run for it to happen. So I think it's incredibly important that you've got somebody in the room with you that you can look across the table at, have an honest conversation, and have them give you honest feedback or give you some advice on areas where you may be able to improve the deal for yourself or give yourself added flexibility as you go.
And how do you nurture that when you're not just looking for money, for financing from them?
It is tough. Primarily when we're talking to our lenders, we're usually asking for them to partner with us on some form of financing. But there's also times outside of work where we'll get together, whether it's a sporting event or a cookout or something like that, or just sometimes a Saturday morning phone call, just to find out how the partner is doing, and what's going on in their life. So it really is more than just a business relationship. It's a personal friendship that you start to grow with your team, especially the longer that you've been doing it. It's hard when you just start to really invest in that relationship because it's new, just like any relationship. But the longer you're with the same people and you're talking the same language, the more that relationship kind of organically grows.
You think it's a combination between understanding you as an individual, as the business owner, as well as understanding the ins and outs of the business, and then finally how it's run? Absolutely.
As they see the paperwork, the income statements, the balance sheets year in and year out, and they see your reaction to them. And I think something like the ability to hit your projections consistently is incredibly important to build that trust, to further that relationship. If you're never hitting your projections, you're always optimistic, obviously there's a little bit of doubt then, that the lender has with your projections and your financials. So just being able to have good conversations, hitting your numbers, hitting your projections, that the goals that you state are goals that are achievable and things that you can actually hit is incredibly important.
Well,
I
listen,
said, Mike,
question, I'm sorry.
That's okay, Mike. I wanted to play off of a little bit. Mark and Dan were talking about the importance of people really understanding their numbers, whether it was internally or externally, as well as how they approach things in order to make good deals from a financial perspective. What I'm interested from your end is what does it take to invest in that in order to learn enough about the business, about the individual, and about how the company is run to be able to not only create the best solution for them, but to be able to have that trust factor for them on behalf of the fiscally responsible organization that you're working for?
Oh, well, I mean, the relationship, working with the client ongoing, not just showing up at an annual renewal is the key thing. You get to know the business. You talk to them on a regular basis. In the pre-COVID days, we actually could go do sporting events and cookouts, as Mark alluded to. It's kind of difficult in this environment, and someday we'll get back to that. But I think most good bankers do the phone calls occasionally and touch base, and we do know things about each other's families. And I kind of laugh because I've watched families grow up at the same time my family has grown up and have moved on to having their own children. So, but I think the key is a bank's got to know the numbers and the people, because when we're talking, about making a deal happen, we got to know that, they'll work for the numbers. Also, communication. I mean, some of the most challenging acquisition deals that have ever happened are the ones that the buyer shows up at your office or on the phone and says, we got a purchase contract, how do we finance it? And didn't bring the bank in at the beginning. I think, Mark, you kind of alluded to that. You work with the bank from the beginning so the bank can put the best deal together, and we can talk through pros and cons and act as a team. And often I think the legal people come in at around that time too. I mean, so that we're all going together as a team and we don't get down the road and all of a sudden the structure doesn't fit into what a bank is willing to do.
Mike, how portable are these relationships? When you're working with somebody who is now a serial entrepreneur or has moved on to another company and was the CFO inside that company, is the portability important, or is it carry over?
Oh, I think the relationship does move on. There is a strong people skill set there. At the same time, I think a good bank will internalize the relationship. It's kind of a combination. If a bank like North Shore Bank always will have multiple people touching a customer. Mark's got at least 3-4 people he knows he can call at North Shore Bank if he's got something happening. The same goes, at the same time, we do have really strong personal relationships, and Mark knows he can go to the head of commercial banking at North Shore Bank and get Margaret's ear at any time, and that's real important. And that's how things get done.
Dan, from your perspective, how portable were the relationships you had built from going from Kohler to running a family office and being able to deal with acquisitions there?
No, that's a good question. So we're pretty new in the family office here in Milwaukee. We just launched it, frankly, 60 days ago. But I've already started porting those relationships over. Those are all things I extremely value, particularly when you look at banking relationships can not only help you advise and create the best deal structure possible, but a lot of times that's a referral network for generating deal flow, particularly as we look at direct investment options. So I've already started leveraging that network into the new family office, which will be particularly important. We'll be having a similar private equity structure with leverage buyouts, so that whole debt stack and capital structure become much, much more important to us. So we're absolutely building that today and leveraging relationships I've built at Kohler and in the past, and looking to build new ones thereafter.
Steve, let's talk a little bit about cumulative relationships that maybe you guys build. At WBD, when you're looking at relationships, I know you mentioned that they're with the banker. Over time, is that something that you just get a level of trust when that banker brings a deal to you, that you know that if there's something that might be a small red flag, you can overcome it? Or does it also work with somebody where you guys have been part of the capital stack on multiple transactions for that individual organization?
Sure. Everything you mentioned, certainly all those different scenarios come up. As I did mention earlier, we do have our main relationship is with the bank and the bankers. Not necessarily the bank, but more on the banker side of things. Bankers do tend to move banks over their career. It's very rare you see a banker that ends up at the same bank they started with at the beginning of their career. So really, my relationship is with that lending officer, so that when wherever they're sitting, they have the knowledge that they can reach out to me to have us structure a loan together with them. But to the opposite side of that, we have customers where the end user of our program has come back for multiple loans because they do like the structure, and we've developed a relationship. They feel comfortable with the SBA loan structure and with myself, where they had a good experience and they want to do another transaction when that is possible.
Gentlemen, we'll end this with what I like to call the best piece of advice, or a parting shot. I'm going to start with you, Steve. One parting shot. If I'm an entrepreneur sitting in the audience and I'm thinking about the combination of relationships and building interesting capital stacks that are going to work for me, what advice would you have for them?
Sure. Get the group of people that you trust together and come up with multiple different options. Get as many different options for the financing as you can, as far as the structure loan, as far as structuring the loan. And then make the choice that best fits what you are trying to accomplish going forward.
Dan?
Yeah, I would say two things. Absolutely build a trusted advisor in your toolkit for any inorganic activity. And second to that is to also build out a network beyond that kind of trusted banker. As I said before, more the merrier. Differing opinions. Hopefully you can select the best of the best and get the best solution possible from that.
Thank you. Mark?
Really the keys that I would put out to somebody is communication. Keep an open line of communication with everyone on your team, and that includes your lending partners. And then stay flexible. I think a lot of times, because you're the one in the driver's seat, you've mulled all these options over and you think you have the best solution right from the beginning, and sometimes there's something else out there that maybe you didn't look at initially that might actually be a good fit for you.
Thank you. Mike, I'm going to give you a last word on this. What's the best advice you can give to the folks who are watching this?
I got to repeat what Mark just said. Communicate and start it as early as possible, and keep the communication going back and forth through the whole process, because the banker and the buyer needs to be on the same page. And if we're not communicating, we don't want to get too far down the road. So I think that's the biggest key to make a successful acquisition, is having that communication going the entire time.
Excellent. Well, Dan, Mike, Mark, Steve, I want to thank you guys for sharing your insight with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move to a Q&A session. We hope you join us over there. Opportunity to meet this great group of panelists and to ask them your own questions. So thank you.